The modern understanding of history rests on the belief that civilization has advanced steadily from primitive roots, evolving from stone tools to steam engines and eventually into the digital age. But when one begins to examine the evidence critically, a different picture emerges, one that suggests not only an interrupted past, but a global suppression of technological truth. Consider the site of Ollantaytambo, an ancient fortress nestled in the mountains of Peru. This structure is composed of granite blocks weighing between 40 to 120 tons each. These stones weren't merely transported, they were moved uphill to high-altitude terrain and fitted with such precision that not even a sheet of paper can slide between them. The official narrative claims that this was done by Incas, using bronze tools and manual labor. Yet granite is one of the hardest natural stones, requiring diamond-level cutting tools by today's standards. The technology needed to accomplish this task simply did not exist in the time period attributed to the Incas. Look closer at the staircases within Ollantaytambo. The scale suggests that they were not built for people our size. Ask yourself, who were they meant for? Now examine the Alexander Column in St. Petersburg, erected in 1834. This monument is a single monolithic piece of red granite weighing approximately 600 tons. It was allegedly carved, transported, and lifted vertically into position, again, during an era predating modern cranes or hydraulic lifting equipment. No adhesive or support holds it in place. It remains upright through balance and weight alone. These are not isolated anomalies. In Cappella San Severo in Naples, Italy, the Veiled Christ statue, completed in 1753, is carved from a single slab of marble. The veil draped over the face appears semi-transparent, revealing facial features beneath. Another sculpture, the Veiled Truth, mimics delicate netting over skin. The degree of micro-precision in these pieces indicates the use of high-level carving tools or automated techniques, but the first known power tool wasn't introduced until 1895. If these dates were accurate, then someone had access to advanced stone shaping technology before the Industrial Revolution. If they are not accurate, we must question everything else that rests on this timeline. So here is where the timeline begins to collapse. We were told that the first electric lamp was invented in 1879, that the first mechanical power tool in 1895. Yet we have structures built in 1753, 1834, and earlier that would require such tools. One impossible explanation is that the history we've been taught is inaccurate by design. There is significant evidence, photographic and structural, of a worldwide mud flood event occurring between 1780 and 1815. The global population appears to have been reset, not naturally, but systematically. A new generation was raised and indoctrinated to believe in a fabricated history. It is no coincidence that photography only became available around 1822, after the reset had already begun. We cannot verify what the world looked like prior to this date because no visual records exist, or rather, they are not shown to us. It is often stated that we live in the most advanced time in human history, but if we truly examine our current infrastructure, that claim begins to break down. Cars, trains, and airplanes operate on the same fundamental principles as they did at the turn of the 20th century. Wiring, metals, and fossil fuel dependence dominate our energy systems. Our digital devices may appear advanced, but they rely on miles of cables, silicon wafers, and rare earth minerals extracted under slave-like conditions. What we've gained in speed and aesthetics, we've lost in efficiency and self-sufficiency. There is no real breakthrough, only controlled innovation, released in slow, profitable increments. In the US during the orphan train movement between 1854 to 1929, orphans were literally brought into town on trains and displayed on stage or at fairs for adoption. Often referred to as baby parades, baby shows, or orphan exhibitions, prospective parents could inspect the child, ask questions, and take them home the same day. Some truly adopted, others took them in as indentured labor. There are many historical records and witness testimonies about baby farming, illegal adoptions, and orphanages selling babies to wealthy families, especially in the early 1900s when record-keeping was easily forged or non-existent. And this is where the concept of the Cabbage Patch Kids dolls came from. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, at the turn of the 20th century, the world's fairs were branded as celebrations of human progress. Electricity, architecture, industry, medicines, they were sold to the public as a vision of the future. But buried inside these grand exhibitions was something far stranger and far more unsettling than most people realize. Among the Ferris wheels, food stands, and mechanical marvels, there were human displays, those of newborn babies. Visitors could stroll through the fair and step into what was essentially a fully functioning neonatal intensive care unit. Row after row of glass incubators held premature infants, tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath, while nurses tended to them as crowds gathered to watch. These exhibits were advertised like any other attraction. Barkers called out to draw attention, tickets were sold, and people paid to look at living infants fighting for survival behind glass. The man credited with popularizing these incubator exhibitions was Martin Kuhne, a German Jewish inventor and physician. According to official history, his first encounter with premature baby incubators occurred at the 1896 World's Fair. Exposure to this technology, we are told, changed him. He believed incubators could save countless lives, but the equipment was expensive and hospitals at the time were not willing to invest in it. His solution was to put the babies on display and charge the public admission to fund their care. From one angle, he is remembered as a hero who saved thousands of premature infants. From another angle, the entire setup feels deeply wrong. Living babies were turned into public attractions. Their survival depended on how many strangers were willing to buy a ticket and stare. These weren't just demonstrations of medical progress, they were attractions. It promoted genetic purity, selective breeding, and elimination of undesirable traits. It promoted eugenics, and it was all rooted in corrupted interpretations of Darwinism. The same era that gave us incubator exhibitions also gave us an epidemic of so-called illegitimate children. We're told that vast numbers of women gave birth out of wedlock and due to overwhelming social shame, surrendered their babies to foundling homes and orphanages. This narrative is treated as common knowledge. It's taught in textbooks, repeated in documentaries, but does it make any sense? Pregnancy is no light burden. It's physically traumatic, emotionally intense, and life-threatening, especially in the 1800s. The idea that countless women were risking death and social exile to secretly bear children they couldn't raise doesn't align with human behavior. And yet, the infrastructure to manage these children was massive. Orphanages were not side projects. They were industrial-scale operations. It needed land, building, food supply chains, nurses, administrators, laws, court systems, entire networks for orphan relocation, trains, ships, foster labor contracts, spanning states and even continents. This wasn't a charity project. It was a coordinated global policy. The kind of logistical, legal, and financial machine that governments only build when something is far more than a social issue. Perhaps this is why so many of the most beloved and enduring characters in Western literature and media from the late 19th to early 20th century are orphans, from Oliver Twist to Anne of Green Gables, and of course, Little Annie. The same archetype repeats. Children with no known parents, no heritage, no ties to the past. Even Huckleberry Finn, drifting downriver without real roots, fits this mold. These characters were not only celebrated, they were idealized. Stories of orphans finding new homes, being assigned new identities, or proving their worth without lineage became central to the cultural imagination. In hindsight, it reads less like coincidence and more like programming, a society learning to romanticize the idea of a child without a past, and a child ready to be placed in a world they didn't build. If these children were truly the product of isolated moral failings, would entire cities be built to house and relocate them? Would laws be written to strip them of identity, regulate their transport, and assign them to unknown homes? Of course not. The story we've been told of morality, shame, and saving face is nothing more than a smokescreen, a cover narrative, and a pretext for something far larger. Repopulation. Because before repopulation comes depopulation, and the early 19th century shows clear signs of a global reset. Photographs from this era reveal cities that appear pristine and fully built, yet eerily empty. Massive architectural complexes with no construction records. Grand rail stations and cathedrals with no crowds. Cities that, according to census records, shouldn't have had the population to justify such advanced infrastructure. And then, just a few decades later, those same cities are bursting with life. Where did the people come from? The orphan children weren't abandoned, they were manufactured. A generation raised without family, culture, or historical memory, raised in institutional systems, fed state-approved narratives, stripped of the past, then relocated into cities they were told were new. But the architecture told a different story. These weren't frontier settlements. They were inherited ruins. Many of the buildings were found buried in mud, with their lower levels excavated and relabeled as basements. Windows sealed, doors half sunken into the earth, arches and towers beyond the capacity of horse-drawn supply chains. These structures were not built by struggling survivors. They were repurposed by a population that had no idea what they had inherited. And this is where the Incubator take on an entirely different meaning. If the old world had just been erased by war, by natural disaster, by engineered collapse, then the newborns on display weren't just fragile curiosities. They were the currency of the new world, the tools of the repopulation effort. Their birth was strategic, their exhibition was symbolic. And like any labor that follows conquest, there was work to be done. Engines to dismantle, vessels to strip, ruins to bury. Every trace of the old world had to be erased or repurposed. History needed rewriting, and memory needed deleting. And what we're witnessing in the 19th and early 20th century is the final stage of that erasure, a transitional period where remnants of the old world still bled through, technologies that didn't match the official timeline, architecture that couldn't be explained, and photographs that captured too much. The enemy didn't think we would find what was left behind, or that we would even care to look. They counted on distraction, on generational amnesia, on blind trust and institutional memory. But the evidence remains. Buried, forgotten. But if you know where to look, it begins to surface. Take a look. Cities bustling with light and technology. And now it's time to ask, where did the power and energy come from? How are these enormous cities and fairs lit with electric brilliance at a time when nearby towns were still using gas lamps and candles? What energy powered these fountains, elevators, moving walkways, and illuminated palaces? And why have they hidden this history from us? They left us breadcrumbs in photos, in architecture, in newspaper clippings, and in films, like Meet Me in St. Louis, where the fair glows like a memory from another world, as if hinting at something long gone, but never fully explained.
You should have seen what we saw. Daddy never saw anything where I could feel alive.
Stop eating that spun sugar.
You spoil your dinner.
Papa, we saw the Gallagher turn flat. Big waves came up and flooded the whole city. And when the water went back, it was all muddy and horrible, full of dead bodies.
Oh, Judy.
Oh, look, the light.
Anything like it in the whole world.
Grandpa, they'll never tear it down, will they?
Well, they'd better not.